Welcome to the Weird and Wicked podcast. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Kristen.
And we're two sisters with a passion for the mysterious and the unknown. On our podcast, we'll explore killer cases and the most puzzling phenomena.
Come with us down the rabbit hole where we'll take a magnifying glass to the most bizarre, unnerving, and unbelievable stories. From true crime and conspiracy theories to ghosts and cryptids, we'll cover it all.
So grab some popcorn, grab a blanket, and get comfy, because this one is about to get wild. Today we'll be talking about the Hog Trail murders.
So before we start, we want to give a bit of a disclaimer. This episode contains topics such as murder and mutilation. It is strictly intended for mature audiences only. This story is recounted from a number of sources that are listed in the show notes. Our discussion on this podcast is based solely on our own research and conclusions. Listener discretion is advised. So, our story begins in Punta Gorda, Florida. Many people might know Punta Gorda because it's actually the direct hit location of Hurricane Charlie back in 2004, which Rachel and I remember vividly. We didn't live in Punta Gorda, but we lived in Cape Coral at the time.
Yeah.
And it was just insane. The destruction done from that hurricane was crazy.
It was pretty rough. I remember like hunkering down and like not knowing what was going to happen.
So we kind of evacuated more inland because everyone knew it was probably heading our way. If you don't know about hurricanes, there's always a cone of uncertainty. And if you're in that cone, you should probably be preparing.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it was probably the entire state of Florida,
but yeah, I remember being held out in the rain and like actually dad was holding us out in the rain because I was like 4 years old at the time, but I remember it so vividly.
Yeah, we were younger, so it was almost like not that concerning for us. Like we were just kind of having fun, like hanging out with the cousins, like, oh yay, like
yeah, it's like, oh, it's just another family party going
on. But yeah, I remember dad taking us out into the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah.
Not even a tropical storm, a category 4 hurricane, and just holding us out in the wind and the rain. And
it felt like needles, the rain.
Why was it so fun though? Is it because we're Floridians? Like
those are our core memories that we have.
Yeah.
But we digress.
We digress.
So that was a whole other tragedy. This story is unlike anything I've ever heard of happening in Southwest Florida. So just buckle up. And one thing I want to add is we do actually have all of our show notes with our research sources, photos, so you can put faces to names as we go through this. All of that is on our website, and you can find all that information down below as well.
Yeah, this one's quite a crazy roller coaster. There's a ton of names. Right. We kind of like snake through all of them. So I feel like looking at the photos was really helpful for me, at least, because there's just a lot of victims.
Yeah, I think we spent like a couple days at least going through all the research, putting it in order, trying to find all the names for each trying to find all the pictures for each name we were coming across. Yeah. So it's a lot.
Yeah, it's like every source has like bits of info, and we were trying to like piece it together, I feel like, and put it all in a timeline.
Right. It was all reported by like local news sources. So I think that's why it got a little bit messy. But we did our best to try to take all of them and put it together and come up with one linear storyline in chronological order as best as we could. So we're going to go through each victim in the story for you so you can get a good idea of what's going on here.
So on February 1st, 1994, in Punta Gorda, a discovery was made that would be the catalyst of a full investigation. 2 hunters were walking through a wooded area off of Wyandotte Avenue called the Hog Trail due to frequent boar sightings. The two had spotted a flock of what looked like buzzards or vultures circling in the sky and decided to make their way toward whatever the birds were after. Upon getting closer, they soon realized that a partially decomposed body of a man was lying there in the dirt, naked and seemingly mutilated.
Oof.
Police were alerted immediately, and upon further examination of the body, officials found that he had rope ligature marks on his wrists and neck, and his genitals had been removed.
So already there's a little bit of panic going on here because this is a horrifying scene.
Horrifying,
And
yeah.
what's interesting about this victim actually is that they found a surgical pin in his ankle, right?
Yeah, so the medical examiner actually took a look at the body, did the whole autopsy and found
Hmm.
this stainless steel pin with a serial number in the victim's ankle, likely from like an attempt to heal a broken bone possibly.
Right.
So they ended up trying to trace this pin to a hospital where maybe an operation of some sort took place. They traced this serial number from the pin and they couldn't find any link to any hospital. So that was their only lead to
It's
trying
kind
to
of
like,
like a dead end.
yeah,
Yeah.
no other like evidence was found at the scene, so there was nothing else pointing them to any clues, and so unfortunately that case went cold pretty quickly.
Until later on, about 2 years later, right?
Mhm.
On January 1st, 1996, police got a phone call reporting that a human skull was actually found at a family residence in Northport. The family told police that the dog, Hollywood, had been bringing them bones from the surrounding woods every so often. This was going on for months before Hollywood finally brought the skull.
Yeah, this is weird to me. 'Cause,
Right.
like,
It's,
okay, like, your dog's bringing some bones, maybe you think it's, like, a cow that died or, like,
yeah. You
someone who
never know what's in the
maybe
woods of Southwest Florida.
Yeah,
Like, we've
exactly.
gone on hiking trails and we found huge, like, femur kind
Yeah,
of looking bones and, like,
yeah. Or, like, boar that die out there, there's a ton of
yeah,
wild
boar
boar.
skulls and even
Yeah,
cow skull, like,
but a skull?
a human
I'm
skull.
thinking, like, if I saw that, I would think it's fake, but then I assume once you get closer, you
You kind
realize
of do a
it's
double take and it's
real.
like, "Oh, shit. Time to call the police."
Yeah. So speaking of which, these people were like, "Let's go call the police." But I saw in a report that they just about fell down their stairs, like trying to run back
Yeah,
and find the phone to
they
call
were
police.
so freaked out by it, yeah. I would be too,
Yeah.
understandably. So, police searched the area and found even more remains, including a hip and a chest bone. The skeletal remains were so decomposed, however, that the skin only remained on the right hand and the chest. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that the victim was likely of muscular stature with a heavy skull and poor dental health. That was pretty much all they could come up with from
Mhm.
examining the remains. They also indicated that he may have been from Scandinavian or northern US descent. There is also speculation that the victim may have had a drug and or alcohol problem and that he may have been mutilated, especially around the genital area. Sadly, this victim to this day has never been identified.
So
So it's
already
very
we're
sad.
yeah. We're on victim 2 and there's already like similarities
Right.
happening, which is like alarming. But these were found in two separate like cities, right? I forget where the
The
first one
first one
was.
was in Punta Gorda, and this one is Northport.
Yeah, so I'm sure people weren't alerted to it yet, but it's just something
Yeah.
clearly that we see in hindsight
And it's
now.
also 2 years apart. So I'm sure at first they were not thinking like, oh,
That's
this
true.
is linked to another case that we found 2 years ago in Punta Gorda. Like, I doubt that was the first thing that crossed their mind, but
Yeah.
there was definitely a sense of like, oh my god, this is weird.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another homicide case with many similarities.
William Melorano, or Bill for short, was born in Lakeland, Ohio I just said Lakeland. Lake
Lakeland.
We're not in Florida, Rachel,
No.
okay. Lakewood, Ohio, on September 22nd, 1960, to Victor and Eleanor Melorano. And I believe we're pronouncing that right, but we do apologize if we're not. It could be Meloragno because there is a G, but
Yeah, it's
I'm just gonna say Melorano.
Melaragno. So, apologies if we get anything wrong.
Yeah. In November of 1995, at the age of 35, he moved to Northport with two women. And it was believed that these two women were sex workers, although the record isn't super clear. But there really isn't much else to be found about Bill in any sources, unfortunately.
Just a regular guy.
Yeah, regular guy. Traveling down to Florida with two sex workers.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it, if you
Just
ask me.
regular.
On March 7th, 1996, a man traveling down Route 75 pulled over to relieve himself in the bushes. After walking into a wooded area, he saw a corpse in a bit of a clearing with limbs spread out in the shape of a cross. The
Oof.
man contacted the Police Department, who came out to the area to investigate.
This
A
already
medic
gives me sorry.
No,
This
you're good.
already gives me chills.
I know.
Like
Oh my god, could you
a
imagine
corpse in
being
a
the dude?
clearing with his limbs spread out.
Yeah, that's very ominous.
It's almost like a ritual was going
Don't
on.
love it.
Yeah.
So, a medical examiner stated that the person had been deceased for about 10 days. He had 4 stab wounds and his genitals were mutilated. Cuts and scrapes were also found on the bottoms of his feet. There's only one reason I feel like why you have cuts and scrapes on your feet. Like, clearly, he was trying to escape.
Right. Yeah, he was probably trying to run away barefoot in the woods from whoever was trying to attack him or murder
Yeah.
him or, you know.
And there were also marks on his torso, which also indicated to investigators that he had tried to escape the killer before death. The victim wasn't identified until June 30th, 1999, as William John Melorano.
After this discovery, only a month later, they found another set of remains, which we'll get into in just a second. But after this, it kind of became clear to the public and police uh, and other authorities that there was a problem going on. Like, this is the
Mm-hmm.
third victim that they've found with the same kind of situation where
Yeah.
they've been dumped in the woods, obviously attacked by someone.
Very violently, too.
Right. It became apparent to them that they need to do something about this as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our next discovery. Richard Montgomery lived with his mother in Palms and Pines Mobile Home Park, just east of Punta Gorda. On his criminal record, he had charges for assault with a deadly weapon, auto theft, burglary, disorderly intoxication, and violation of probation.
So he's not really sounding like a star citizen.
Right, yeah. He had some issues going on, clearly. But on April 16th, 1996, a couple of road workers were at work on Highway 41. In the middle of the day, the two decided to take a break and go for a walk down a hog trail. While on their walk, they discovered what appeared to be a human skull. The two were horrified. They hurried back to their vehicle and drove to a gas station nearby. It was here that they met two officers who were actually on their lunch break and told them about what they had seen. The officers agreed to go back with them to investigate the scene. And upon arriving at the spot where the skull was, they confirmed it to be human and immediately alerted the station. It was then that this area was swarmed by homicide investigators from 5 different agencies. In the research, it said there was the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the state attorney's office, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, the Fort Myers Police Department, and the Northport Police Department. So, like, several different cities were involved because
Mm-hmm.
this case was becoming bigger than they ever thought it would be, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I'm glad they decided to team up because a lot of times you see, the typical dick measuring contest where
right.
it's like they don't want help. They want to figure it out
They can do this
themselves.
alone.
But yeah,
They don't
it's
need
like
help from other agencies. Like,
step off,
they're the
bitch.
best. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad they're
Luckily,
teaming
that's not what
together.
was going on here.
I hope not. I like to think not. Well, I think too because there wasn't a lot of evidence. They probably like
Mhm.
accepted the fact that like, okay, I think we need to team up with these people and like figure out the similarities and see if there's anything lying in all of the information that we already have
Yeah.
because there was like no other evidence.
And the public was probably putting pressure on them too because
Yeah.
this kind of thing doesn't happen too often in Southwest Florida. Like, obviously there's some sort of possible serial killer in the
Yeah.
area because the same thing is happening over and over again,
All
and
throughout this area.
they want them to find this guy or people
Mhm.
or whoever it may be. Hey, did y'all know that we're on YouTube? Well, we are. If you'd like to listen and watch us pick apart these cases, drop by and check out our channel at Weird and Wicked Podcasts on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. As they searched the area for the rest of the remains, officers came across what appeared to be a carpet roll. And it wasn't like a carpet roll, it was like carpet padding, kind of.
Yeah, it was like the stuff underneath the carpet.
Yeah. So sticking out from the side of this carpet roll looked to be a human hand.
Yeah, and I remember at this point they didn't really know for sure if it was like the rest of the body that they had found the remains of
Right.
or if it was like a homeless person sleeping there.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't imagine like go what's going through their heads.
It
Like,
could be the killer for all they know. Like,
yeah.
who knows? So they pulled the carpet roll back and saw that it was not actually the rest of the remains that they were looking for, but another body, maybe 2 days old at most. The victim had rope burns around his neck and his genitals had been removed. There were also footprints that seemed to be pretty fresh all around the body, like someone had been there recently.
Mhm.
In addition to these findings, near Montgomery's hip, detectives found a blue paint chip, which they took for evidence.
Remember that paint chip.
Yes, this paint chip comes in
Keep it in your
later.
back pocket.
Using dental records and fingerprints, investigators were able to identify that the second body found was 21-year-old Richard Allen Montgomery. And I assume that they were able to match him up mostly due to the fingerprints since he had offenses in the past, like he was an
Yeah.
offender. So that's probably how they identified him.
Yeah, his mother said that she didn't really have a lot of information for police, but she did say that her son had mentioned a few weeks prior to his death that he had met a new friend named Dan Conahan.
Hmm.
Neighbors described Montgomery as being a problem child growing up, and there were also reports of him being abusive towards his mother as he got older. His sister stated that the night before he went missing, Richard said that he would be going out to make a couple $100, and when she asked him if what he was doing was legal, he just smiled and left. Little did she know that that would be the last time she would see him alive.
Or anyone would see him alive, really,
Yeah,
besides whoever killed him.
besides the killer.
Right.
So, since Montgomery's body was relatively fresh, as we mentioned, the medical examiner was able to use his fingerprints to then identify him. In comparison, the skull and torso found near Montgomery were almost completely decomposed. The only flesh that was left on the victim was on his back. This piece of flesh was preserved due to the torso being placed face up. When coroners began to move the torso for further examination, they noticed that there was a tattoo on the victim's shoulder. In order to help identify the remains, law enforcement immediately teamed up with the media to release photos of this tattoo. They didn't have to wait very long before they got a call from Naples resident Teresa Smith. She told investigators that her brother had a similar looking tattoo and she hadn't seen him for some time. After her tip, medical examiners were able to acquire her brother's dental records and made the discovery that the victim was indeed Teresa's brother, Kenneth Lee Smith.
So I also wanted to add here that in some of the sources, it was saying that it was actually his mom that called, not his
Mm,
sister.
that's right,
So
yeah.
maybe Teresa was his mother and Kenneth was Teresa's son, but who knows? Like, it's kind of unclear. So yeah, it could be either one.
So, not much is known about Kenneth Smith except that he was a previous resident of Naples, Florida, but at some point moved to Charlotte County. Like many of the other victims, Kenneth was not a savory character. He had been previously arrested in 1991 on, get ready because it's a long list.
Mm-hmm.
So he was arrested on charges of driving with a suspended license, grand and petty theft, eluding officers, resisting arrest, and reckless driving. Smith was also arrested in 1992 for a violation of his probation.
Yeah. So although he wasn't a great guy either, he obviously had some issues too, just like Richard. No one deserves to die like that. It's just terrible.
It's really sad.
And that's one of the reasons why um, investigators and authorities decided to make a task force for solving these murders. Um,
Mhm.
because it was just so this was the fifth victim that fourth and fifth victims that they had discovered that had kind of the same MO going on. Like
Mhm.
there were so many similarities between these cases and it
Yeah,
was
the
becoming a
ligature marks, the
yeah,
mutilation.
right. The horrible circumstances leading up
Mhm.
to whatever they went through. So the lead investigator, Detective Ricky Hobbs of the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, stated that the investigation team expected there to be a single person behind the murders. At this point in their investigation, they didn't quite have a suspect until an unlikely source popped up who had information on a possible suspect.
In May of 1996, an inmate from Moore Haven Correctional Facility in Florida requested to speak to police about an incident he had experienced a year prior. The inmate, David Payton, recounted his experience. He stated that in March of 1995, he was in Fort Myers and a man pulled up in a blue Mercury Capri and offered him some beer. Peyton then proceeded to enter the vehicle. They drove away, and the man offered him Valium, more beer, and marijuana.
So already a recipe for disaster going on here.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
good.
Not good. I mean, the fact that beer already impairs you, add some drugs on top of it, and you're not really
Yeah.
asking for a
Given
good night, I feel like.
he wasn't getting in the driver's seat, but this guy just offered him the beer, I think you would assume that that guy would be drinking too. People have different lifestyles, but that's not something I would do.
No, definitely not. And just the fact that he, like, doesn't know this guy, I mean, okay,
It's just
it
a
was
red
in
flag.
'96, but yeah, definitely a red flag,
Yeah.
but I guess he just wanted some beer and
Mhm.
some Valium and some marijuana,
Yeah.
so he's a grown adult.
Yes.
At one point along the ride, the man asked Peyton for a sip of his beer, to which Peyton agreed, but thought that this was pretty weird since they had a whole pack with them. Like, why are you asking me for a sip of
Yeah.
my beer when you
Just get
can
your own. You're the one
grab a
that
whole fresh
yeah.
one?
It's like you're the one that offered me this beer and now you want
Yeah.
it back?
Now you want
Now you
now
want
you
a
want a
sip
sip of
of
mine?
it? So weird.
Very odd, but the guy, like, goes along with it, I guess.
Mhm.
But he later stated that he thought the man may have put more pills in the can.
Mhm.
Payne also alleged that during their ride, the man commented that he would pay to take photos of him naked and bound to a tree,
Hmm.
which terrifying. At that point, I think I would be opening the door and rolling out
Yeah.
and, like, hoping that I survive because we aren't doing that, dude.
No.
We just aren't. They continued to drive until the car got stuck in some mud. Payne offered to help push the car while the man steered, but he told him to stay in the car. At that moment, another motorist pulled up to help them unstuck. At that moment, another motorist pulled up to help them get the car unstuck. Peyton noticed that the man's demeanor changed as the stranger was helping. This made him even more nervous about the whole situation.
Yeah. I mean, I would be nervous too, considering this guy was obviously like, he
Up
obviously
to
got a little
something.
bit, I don't know, nervous because this random person came up and now he's like acting all weird. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if it said this in the sources, but I imagine he was like trying not to like have the guy see what he had in his car or like I don't know.
I mean, there's just red flags
Yeah,
going up left and right. Peyton, by the grace of God, states that he turned around to look in the back of the car and saw that there was a tarp, some rope, and a knife on the floor. And
there you
I
go.
don't think you could describe a better kill kit. I don't think there is a better kill kit.
It's
So,
so crystal clear that you need to get out of that car as soon as possible or
yeah. So at that point, only at that point, Peyton could tell something was seriously off, so he reportedly floored the vehicle and finally drove away. But it wasn't long before he got pulled over by authorities. Remember, he's drinking beer, he
yeah, he's
has
kind of
been
out of
smoking
it.
marijuana, doing drugs.
Which, thank God, even in that state, he was able to recognize that maybe that's why it took him so long to make the decision to get out of that situation because
That's true.
he was probably a little bit drunk
Definitely
on
under the
drugs.
influence.
Yeah.
That's a good
So
point.
at least thank God he was able to realize like I got to get
Mhm.
out of here.
Although the car was registered to a Daniel Conahan Sr., it had been reported stolen by Daniel Conahan Jr. Upon questioning Payne, the officers could tell that he was under the influence of some sort of substance. This led to Peyton's arrest, and after telling his story to an unbelieving Fort Myers Police Department, he took a polygraph test and passed.
So you think that that would kind of just have them let him go? Like, oh, this obviously
Yeah.
happened to you. We need to go find this guy that tried to kill you. Like,
Yeah, that's like a very traumatic
yeah.
experience.
And I know like polygraph tests aren't super accurate. People pass them all the time when they've been lying. People fail them when
Yeah,
they're telling the
vice
truth.
versa.
But still, like, you'd think the police would ask more questions at least. I don't know.
Yeah, or like try to investigate a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, this did not exonerate him from the auto theft charge or the DUI, and he ended up being sent to prison anyway.
Ugh. Imagine telling police that you literally felt like you were going to be killed. Even took a polygraph, passed, and everything, and they did nothing to try to like find this guy or even question. They knew his name from
Yeah,
the report. They didn't even call this guy in to ask him about it. Like,
they should have done that at least.
yeah.
The dude escaped death and eventually found himself in prison pretty much for running away from a murderer, which is really, really terrifying and sad.
Yeah, I mean, he was probably drunk and high, so they were like, whatever, this guy, like, he's imagining things, and that's why he passed, maybe, but I don't know. Still so terrible.
Even though the police didn't quite believe Peyton's story, at least they had a possible suspect now.
So, Daniel Conahan Jr. was born in Charlotte, North Carolina in May of 1954. Remember, Daniel Conahan Jr. is the one who made this report. So, shortly after his birth, his family decided to move to Punta Gorda, Florida. Conahan grew up in a middle class family. It's said that he had a bit of a troubled childhood. Friends would go on to describe him as a loner and who kind of kept to himself most of the time. Some sources state that he may have either been involved with or maybe affected by drugs and or alcohol.
Which could definitely explain his troubles as a
Yeah,
child, I feel like.
it's kind of understandable. Anyone growing up around that kind of stuff
Yeah.
um, will have issues. The majority of his issues growing up, however, seemed to stem from his parents not being very accepting when Conahan told them when he was a teenager that he was gay. There's no information online about his parents' background, and it's kind of unclear why or what their reasoning for their disapproval was.
Yeah, I saw in a few of our sources that his parents actually sent him to a psychiatrist to help him with his sexual disposition, as if it's something you can just cure.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
what was it, the 70s? I forget what year this
This
is,
is
but
the
still.
this is probably, I mean, he was born in 1954, so I
Yeah,
assume, like, it's probably early
mid,
70s, maybe
yeah,
late
late
60s.
60s. So I kind of get it, but it's
Yeah,
just like, I don't know. It's really, you can see how he would be annoyed by this, because it's pretty messed up, I
yeah.
feel like.
And despite telling his parents that his sexuality was not a disease that could be cured, they actually continued to treat it as such. At one point in an interview, Conahan states, quote, "It wasn't the kind of thing you were open about in the 1970s, but I found a gay bar, and if I got there early, they wouldn't card me. Being gay is part of God's plan too." End quote. Later, Conahan graduated from Miami's Norland High School in 1973. Some of his high school classmates have described him as being quiet and, again, a loner. They say he would kind of just do the bare minimum in any school activity. So there isn't much known about what Conahan did after right after graduation. And his next big life event wouldn't be until 77.
So Conahan joined the U.S. Navy in 1977 and was stationed at Naval Station Great Lakes, Illinois. But this didn't last very long for Conahan. He was dishonorably discharged in 1978, a year later after he joined, for sexual solicitation and physical assault,
Hmm.
which is pretty serious.
Yeah. Not a good start.
Yeah. He was accused of solicitation after attempting to lure fellow soldiers to a motel off base. Conahan was then threatened with a court martial, but the case was dropped after no one was willing to testify against him. A few months later, he made a sexual advance on another soldier. This led to a physical altercation between the two. After the incident, the Navy decided to then dishonorably discharge Daniel Conahan. Clearly, this guy is not up to good shit.
He's not there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I think in the documentary that we watched about this guy, they said he, in this physical altercation where he got dishonorably discharged, he tried to hit the guy with a rock, like on the beach, I think.
Yeah, they're on a beach. This struggle ensues, and his first thought is to hit this guy
Like, what
with
are
a
you
rock.
doing?
After he was discharged, he would actually stay in Chicago for about 13 years. It's said that he tried to work several different jobs, but couldn't seem to keep them. He kept kind of just bouncing around to different places. Even though he didn't really have a source of steady income for himself, he still managed to keep up a busy social life and found himself frequenting gay bars around the city. After being in Chicago for a while and seemingly not really finding a good place to work, he decided to move back with his parents in Punta Gorda, Florida. While living there, he started taking nursing classes at Charlotte Vocational Technical Center in Port Charlotte. He graduated at the top of his class in 1995 and officially became a licensed practical nurse.
It probably seemed like he finally found what he was meant to do. Like maybe it seemed like he finally found a purpose.
Yeah, all seemed to be going just great for him, especially after having such a hard time in Chicago.
Yeah.
But under the surface, there was something much more sinister going on in Conahan's life.
After hearing about the two bodies recently found in Charlotte County, the Fort Myers Police Department got in contact with the Charlotte County Police Department, like we mentioned earlier, that little task force. Um, they told them about a similar case that happened in Fort Myers, except their victim actually made it out alive. This victim was Stanley Burden. Burden had previously said that Conahan had one night offered him $100 to $150 in exchange for nude bondage photographs. This is what's so weird about this story. I think in one of the sources it said that Burden would hang out around a little park in Fort Myers called the Lions Park. And that's actually where Conahan pulled up and made him this offer. And
Hmm.
it's weird to me because we literally used to go to that park and like like the
Oh,
playground side of it
yeah,
at
the
least.
playground. I mean,
It was a
the park is fairly big? I mean, it's
I
not
think
like
there were like old tennis courts and stuff, and there was like a little bit of a field. Um,
it's not like Central Park Park. It's like a
yeah,
smaller
it's
park.
it's pretty small. Meanwhile, this like obviously this wasn't happening when we were alive going to the park, but
Just crazy to think.
so after being offered this $100 to $150 from Conahan, Burden agreed, and Conahan proceeded to drive him out to a densely wooded area all the way on the easternmost end of Edison Avenue. After taking several photos of Burden, he used a rope to tie him to a tree. Conahan then performed oral sex on Burden and attempted to have anal sex with him, but Burden positioned his backside against the tree so that Conahan couldn't manage. This frustrated Conahan, who then wrapped the rope around Burden's neck, put his foot against the opposite side of the tree, and pulled hard, attempting to strangle Burden, who struggled for his life. After 30 minutes of trying to strangle Burden, Conahan gave up after saying the words, quote, "Why won't you die, you son of a bitch?" End quote. He grabbed his things, left Burden, and Burden freed himself and immediately reported it to the police.
Yeah, some sources, are, if I remember correctly, say that Burden pretended to pass out from being
Hmm.
strangled, and that's actually why Conahan left him there.
Yeah, maybe he thought he was dead and he just kind of left. Like maybe this was his first attempt at doing something like this. Because this
Yeah,
happened in, when was it? 1944, or not 44, 1994. So this was like around this happened around the same time that first body was found.
that's right.
So it could have been one of his first like attempts, which is like
Mhm.
chilling. Like it was only
That's
just beginning.
true. 30 minutes. Like, could you
Oh,
imagine being, like, tied to a tree and this guy is raping you and trying to kill you and strangle you, and you're just, like,
yeah.
hanging in there for 30 minutes? That's insane to me.
Burden even later picked out Conahan's face from a lineup. Officers went to the scene 2 years later after Burden brought up his story again. In the exact location Burden claimed Conahan attempted to rape and murder him, they found a tree with damage and markings that corroborated with Burden's claims and scars from his injuries, which is crazy that those marks were still there on that tree.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
I
this
never
account. Oh, sorry.
no, I was just gonna say it's crazy that they thought to look at the trees, and I think maybe it's also
Mhm.
crazy that they found the tree too, but that's, like,
Yeah.
very smart to do.
And these injuries that he got from almost being strangled to death, he still had the scars from it, and
Mhm.
it's interesting that they looked at the marks on the tree and his scars, and it was clear to them that this was in fact a real thing that
Story,
happened.
yeah.
Like
Mhm.
he was telling the truth. So this is what led police to begin their full 24/7 investigation of Conahan. It kind of became apparent to them now, finally, that they had a real
Mhm.
subject or a real suspect, and they needed to gather more evidence. They thought that the best way to, I don't know, finally
Like,
arrest Conahan,
catch him.
yeah, would be to catch him in the act. So they decided to
Mhm.
set up a sting operation. On May 24th of 1996, a deputy went to Kiwanis Park to try to bait Conahan. Not surprisingly enough, Conahan did come around to the undercover deputy and offered to pay him $150 in exchange for nude photographs. Same thing. Same thing every time.
Immediately too, like, very quickly.
Yes. The deputy went along with it at first, but then stated he didn't have time to take any more photos as he had somewhere to be. The deputy stated that Conahan became a little bit cautious of him at this point. Maybe he suspected that he was undercover, so he
Mhm.
stopped pursuing him and fled the scene pretty much. I can't imagine being that
Oh
deputy,
my
like
god.
being in that situation. I think in the documentary it said that one of the reasons he didn't continue like trying to get evidence was because at the time undercover deputies couldn't undress, like they couldn't be naked on the jaw, like on the scene, I guess. So
Mhm.
that's why he had to just kind of cut it there.
Well, plus The Wire maybe was, like,
Yeah,
there. I don't know how they
right.
were recording him. I'm assuming he was wearing a wire, but yeah. The documentary was very interesting because it gets his perspective. They, like, did a little interview with him,
Yeah,
and it made me think of, like, how actually insane it would be to be an undercover officer and be tasked with this assignment.
because you never know what can happen.
Yeah, and they pretty much know that, like, this is their guy, and he's very
Mhm.
dangerous.
And he responded the same way and everything, so
Yeah. And, like, the task force is right there, like, near him, but they're not
mhm.
so close as if, like, something happened, they would just be able to, like, jump in really
Yeah.
quick and save him, but just really scary.
Ugh.
His account was very interesting to hear, though, for
Yeah,
sure. I
and
would
we'll
recommend
put
watching that.
like we said earlier, we'll put all of the source information, including links to these little videos
Mhm.
and documentaries down
Yeah.
in the show notes.
Yeah, they'll be in the show notes and our website
Yeah,
as well.
I highly recommend watching those.
We are always super excited to learn about obscure conspiracies, creepy ghost stories, and really anything that will keep us up at night. So if you have something you'd like us to cover, fill out our case submission form on our website. After the police sting and surveillance, investigators gathered enough evidence and probable cause to finally arrest Conahan. In fact, they realized that he had a pattern of targeting transients, day laborers, and anyone who might be looking to make a quick buck.
Mhm.
However, they wanted to first see if they could get him to confess to all these murders. So they set up a traffic stop and managed to get Conahan to agree to an interview in a non formal setting, which is crazy. Like, you get stopped in this traffic stop, and then, like, all of a sudden he's okay with being questioned about these
Yeah.
murders.
Maybe he thought he really wasn't a suspect.
True.
I guess that's a
It
good
has to be.
part about this is the officers were actually really smart in how they
Mhm.
handled the whole situation because
Yeah.
just like going in, storming in and arresting this guy, it probably would have scared him into not giving any information.
Yeah. Props to them too, they kinda knew, like, the whole non-formal setting. So, like, they set up this motel room with
Mhm.
video and audio recording devices, and that's where they questioned
It
him.
was like
So, like,
super casual,
laid
comfortable.
back, like, the dude didn't feel like he was getting
Yeah, he wasn't at
interrogated.
a station or anything, so
I think that was smart on their part.
mhm.
But in the interview or the interrogation, whatever you want to call it, they were being a little bit laid back, but then they started pressuring him a little bit more. But even through this, he maintained his innocence and also denied ever partaking in any bondage acts. During the interview, Conahan actually stated that, quote, I learned there are a lot of hitchhikers on US 41 from Northport to Fort Myers, and some of them were looking to perform sex acts for money. Yes, I did proposition people, and I took some pictures of people. I didn't have a place to take someone to, or time to sit in the parks and run into the bushes like some of them do. And I wasn't doing it in bars. End quote. While the two detectives interviewed Conahan, investigators got a warrant to search the suspect's home and his vehicle and found a number of damning pieces of evidence, including paint samples from his vehicle.
So, remember back when we were talking about Richard Montgomery and how they found a little blue paint chip near his hip? Well, police compared this paint chip to the samples they took from the car, and it was actually an exact match.
I tried to get pictures of this because
Hmm.
honestly, there's not a lot of evidence like on Google or on just like any regular search. But watch the documentary because Peacock prevented me from screenshotting it. But
Yeah.
you can literally see it's an exact match for these two paint chips. So the two paint chips gave the police enough evidence to charge Daniel Conahan with the kidnapping and murder of Richard Montgomery.
Meanwhile, in 1997, in Port Charlotte, a county construction worker was said to have been clearing up a bit of debris off a dirt path when he came across what looked to be human remains under a pepper tree near Quesada Avenue. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
I think
correct
that's
me
right.
if I am
I think
wrong.
you're right.
Because there was an excavation project by county workers in the area, any possible evidence that could have been left behind from the crime scene was accidentally destroyed. The coroner later determined that the victim had been dead for several years. Through DNA comparison between the victim and his parents, however, it was confirmed on March 16th, 1998, that this victim had been a young man named William or Billy Patton. Billy was his nickname. Billy Patton was a local landscaper. The last time his parents saw him was in 1993. He was carrying a cooler of beer toward the Baron Collier Bridge. He wasn't reported missing until 3 weeks later after that sighting.
So while Conahan was actually awaiting trial, police found another body, same MO, same profile, all the same circumstances.
And I think it was assumed that it was most likely one of his victims.
Yeah, it's just so sad because, like, the paint chip is obviously what linked Conahan to
Yeah.
Montgomery, but, like, the lack of evidence in all the other ones is, I feel like, why it was
Especially this
just,
one because they didn't have really anything.
yeah.
So,
From the information that we found on the case, the trial was fairly uneventful. Conahan pleaded innocent, but was found guilty of first-degree murder for the killing of Richard Montgomery. On November 3rd, 1999, after deliberating for only 22 minutes,
22.
that's 22 minutes. I think that's the shortest deliberation in history. Check me on that, but it's pretty
One
damn
of the
quick.
shortest, at least.
Yeah. So after deliberating for those 22 minutes, the jury suggested to the judge that Conahan be executed. Judge Blackwell decided that Daniel Conahan Jr. would be sentenced to death. In his final sentencing statement, Judge Blackwell said, quote, "It is obvious that during this ordeal, Montgomery was confined or imprisoned against his will. Such confinement against his will was for the obvious purpose of inflicting bodily harm upon the victim or terrorizing him. The crime was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Two medical examiners testified that many of Montgomery's wounds were inflicted before he died. May God have mercy on his soul." End quote. That speaks volumes. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure that I don't know how old he was, how many cases he's tried, but
It's just, it shows that it was so clear to everybody that this guy was the perpetrator and the killer. Also, the fact that it only took them 22 minutes to decide to execute him.
I'm assuming the other victims weren't allowed to be like brought up during trial, but I can only imagine if they knew that.
Yeah.
While Conahan was only convicted with the murder of Montgomery, he is suspected of killing 14 other men.
Jeez.
Yeah. The kidnapping and attempted murder charges of Stanley Burden were dropped in the process of the indictment of Conahan. So this part is crazy. The case against Conahan didn't even end there. For literal years after he was imprisoned, even more bodies were found across all of Southwest Florida. So these discoveries started with the remains of Charlotte County John Doe in 2002, who was found in a landfill in Punta Gorda. Not much has been published about this victim, but because of the location of the body and the circumstances of the timing, detectives presumed that it was another one of Conahan's victims. To this day, these remains have never been identified.
Doesn't even end there.
More discoveries were made 5 years later when a surveyor discovered skeletal remains in an area full of Melaleuca trees. Investigators would later find a total of 8 sets of skeletal remains, which they labeled as the Fort Myers John Doe, A through H.
Right.
As of today, only 4 of the 8 sets of remains have been identified. John Belvins and Eric Kohler in 2007, Jonathan T. Hay in 2008, and Robert Ronald Sodden just recently in September of 2022. Fort Myers John Doe A, B, F, and G are still yet to be identified. The remains of the victims to this day are still referred to as the Fort Myers 8.
It's crazy that that many people were found in the same location.
Same
Like,
area,
before, it's
yeah.
been, like, kind of spread out for the most part, except for, Richard Montgomery and
Mhm.
Kenneth Smith. They were kind of found in the same location, but the rest of them
What,
were kind of spread
8?
out. So, like, 8 sets. Oh, it's it's just crazy.
With more advanced DNA testing, police were able to reopen similar cases that had gone cold from before Conahan was convicted. Remember that first set of remains with the surgical pin that the police found it back in 94? At the time, they were unable to trace where the pin came from or who the victim was. But with these new DNA testing methods, they were able to identify the victim in 2021 as Jerry Lombard.
So 2 of these victims were just recently identified. The one in
Yeah.
2021, Jerry Lombard, and the one in 2022, literally just in September. It's January now at the time that we're filming, as Robert Sodden. So it's
So,
crazy. I just can't get over it.
yeah, me either, honestly. I'm glad. I'm so glad that we live in a day and age where DNA testing is where it's at because gosh, that's the only reason these were ever identified.
Yeah.
Same with a lot of cases. Like, there are tons of cases that are like 30, 40, 50 years old, and they're just now getting like solved with that DNA testing. It's just
Yeah.
amazing. Many speculate that Daniel Conahan was also responsible for the murder of these victims. Unfortunately, authorities have never been able to officially connect Conahan to them, only Montgomery
I assume because of the lack of evidence to
evidence.
connect them. Like, with Montgomery, I think the paint chip was the kind of
The
the
smoking
thing that
gun.
solidified everything for them, whereas the other victims didn't really have anything that would directly link the 2. So,
It really sucks that he can't, like, go down for all of them, but at the same time, he got the death penalty,
yeah.
and at least he'll rot until he does
Mhm.
get executed.
Yep. So overall, it's safe to say that Daniel Conahan is a seriously sick individual. We all know that just by reading the profiles of each of these victims. The fact that he did what he did to these poor men without any remorse or even admitting to the crimes is just absolutely chilling to me. Like, he
Yeah.
has never even admitted to Montgomery's death, let
It's
alone
so
these
messed up.
14,
Like,
13 to 14 other people that were found. So it's just so pathetic,
it's
honestly.
really yeah, that's the perfect word for it.
This case was so insane on so many levels.
So, well, just on the research level, like, we spent so long compiling this and going through everything and finding little details and stuff. I'm sure we missed a lot. So feel free to let us know if you know more details of
Yeah, that's the good
certain
part
aspects.
because we actually keep all of the conversations that we'll have on this podcast going on
Yes.
our social media accounts and stuff. So if you have any other information that we
Mhm.
missed, or maybe there's a little detail that we got wrong in the case, you can definitely pop over there on Instagram, Facebook. We actually even have a TikTok.
Mhm.
Any of those, even on our website, you can
Yeah,
contact
feel free
us.
to like add a comment to the blog. We're gonna have a blog post up pretty much of all of our information on the
Yeah,
case.
for each case we do.
Um,
Yeah.
we honestly like. I feel like at least for me, I have a feeling I'm speaking for you as well. But every case that like we dive into, I will always enjoy like revisiting and talking about and getting other opinions and
Right.
just kind of like talking it out.
Especially with a case like this that's so in depth.
Yeah, feel free to keep the conversation flowing on our socials on the website.
Yeah.
Let us know what you guys think of our pilot episode.
Yes.
We're getting used to our equipment. We're getting used to
It was kind of
filming.
a dark start to it all, but an
Yeah.
interesting start. We wanted to do a case that was in depth just to test ourselves, I think.
Yeah. I'm glad we chose this one to begin with. I also like the fact that we grew up there, so it's pretty like close to home for
Mhm.
us.
And I think it's a little bit lesser known too. I before researching it, I don't think I even ever heard of it, and I'm from that area, so
That's one thing that we kind of want to achieve with this podcast. Like, of course, all of us enjoy like the big crazy cases that everyone knows about.
right.
But I think at least getting started, we're going to try to cover those like smaller cases that don't get a lot of coverage
Yeah.
or just aren't really known about a whole lot. So if you have a case like that, and
Yes.
you'd like us to kind of do our research on it and make a little episode about it, we do have a case submission form on the website. So you can fill that out and we'll get researching right away.
Yes. All right, let us know what you think.
Thank you guys. I
Thank
don't
you.
know how to
I don't
end
know
it,
how
but
to end it either. We'll figure it out.
thanks for listening.
For now, we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Weird and Wicked podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you drop a like and leave a review.
And make sure to subscribe and follow us on all of our socials so you know when the next episode is up.